to the next episode of Straight Up Eagan Podcast. I'm here on location at Minnesota Behavioral Specialist, sitting down with the owners, Camille and Paige. So thank you guys for letting me come in and crash your place.
Absolutely.
It's always fun to kind of see the business inside. Before we get started on the business part, let's kind of talk about origin story, kind of where you guys came from, what led you to this profession, and any other cool fun facts.
Yeah, well, as a child, I spent a lot of time just finding myself in the special ed room. I loved going there, being a part of what they were doing, watching speech, watching OT, participating. I went to summer camp with them, or summer school. Even got to ride on the bus with my cousin, and I just kind of knew this was the line of work I wanted to go into.
Mm-hmm.
When I moved to the Twin Cities, I met my first child with autism, and at that point, I was like, this is new. This is very, very different than what I was used to, and I kind of fell in love with it. I was reached out by a parent that worked with a few people that I had worked with, and she just had recommended, hey, I've heard about you. Want to come see what this ABA thing is all about?
Okay.
And I was like, sure, let's try it. And that's the end. I mean, that was in 2002.
Wow.
And I've never left the field.
For me, I always knew I wanted to work with children, and I always wanted to go in the psychology field. And I had this really cool opportunity my senior year in high school to do a senior project where you get to work at an environment where you want to learn more about. And so I worked at a preschool in the mornings.
Okay.
And there was a child with autism, and that was my first true experience with it. And I was just fascinated with how the brain works and how smart he was. And even though he processed things differently, he just floored me with the things that he could do and how his brain could work. And then I went in to go study psychology for graduate school and moved to Minnesota and ended up in a job working in this field. And at first I was like, it'll be temporary. And then here I am 15 years later and could not imagine being anywhere else. Like, this is my place.
Yeah. So it started from, fairly young coming to this. It wasn't like this,
And we often talk about that. You either know or you don't know. Like, this is it. This is what you love to do. Or you're like, I don't know how long I can do this.
It seems like a hard field to just kind of jump into.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't have, the experience or the passion behind it.
Yeah.
It's not just like a temporary job. You know?
It's definitely, you have to love working with kids.
Sure.
And you have to have patience. You don't have to have patience in your whole life, because I'm not going to lie, when it comes to my children, sometimes I don't have the patience that I have with the kids I work with. But
understandable.
You do have to have that patience and that ability to...
And by the kids you work with, you mean your children? In real life?
In real life, the children I work with in this field, I have patience with.
Sure.
My children, I struggle with.
Right.
But I think you have to really, really love what you do, and you have to be okay waiting a really long time to get those results for certain things. I was talking with a therapist who works with us, and she was like, sometimes I'm like, am I doing things wrong? I'm not seeing any changes. I'm doing it wrong. And then you see it, and it's like, this is what I've been waiting for. This moment right here is what I've been doing the past 2 months to get to. And it's so rewarding, but it's not rewarding every day.
Well, and I think that's the biggest thing. It's not rewarding every day. There's those days where you're like, this just happened.
Yeah.
We just came from a client that sat at the table for 10 minutes, and 3 months ago we were like, if we could just get him to sit for one activity, that'd be awesome. And we walked in and he's just doing his thing, sitting at the table, and he's 3 years old.
And you think back to all the work that's led up to that.
Yeah.
It wasn't just overnight.
Yeah.
No, it's all these baby steps.
Absolutely. And even the staff that when I do interviews, your background is one thing, but my biggest question is, do you love playing with kids? Do you love watching them smile? Do you love watching them succeed and learn? Because if that's something you love, we can teach you the therapy aspect. We can't teach you to have fun with kids. If you don't internally have a drive for that, this isn't the right field for you.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So you guys as a business, when did you start your current business?
We opened March 1st of 2020. We had talked about it before that, but we officially opened March 1st. And then the pandemic hit, so then we stayed home with our kids, and we did homeschooling and e-learning, and wanted to rip our hair out of our heads, because once again,
there's that
not the
patience
with our own kids. And then we officially opened our doors September 6th of 2020.
Yep.
And then we actually started in-home, doing services in the home, and we
Okay.
still have that.
Yep.
But we opened up our center November 28th
Yep.
of 2022. So
That was a huge addition.
huge
Yeah.
addition, but always our long-term goal. Like, in-home is so wonderful for some kids and some families. And then the center is so wonderful for other kids and other families. And so having the options to meet the needs of the child, the family, that whole aspect is so important. So we love having both.
What are some benefits to the center versus in-home and vice versa?
Yeah. So all of the kids at the center are there 8:30 to 4:30. It is a full-time program. All of the kids we work with are 10 years of age and younger. So some of our biggest goals as a company was, how can we get these kids in school? How can we get them ready to be in that environment? So like the sitting at the table, thinking about at school, you got to sit at your desk for longer periods of time or stay on task with an activity for longer periods of time. So we really cater our programming to increase socialization with peers, to increase the ability to stay engaged with activities, and be able to have the communication effectively. And so those kids at the center are there full time.
Is that 5 days a week, or is there a
5
certain?
days a week.
Okay.
Yep. The kids in the field have the opportunity to be full-time if that's what the family's looking for, but they also have the opportunity to be part-time. So now we have some kids that are in school half a day and do therapy half the day. And eventually our goal is then to transition them to full days in the school and not having to have that intensive therapy anymore. And that's, ABA is really an intensive therapy. That's why there's 40 hours a week. And so doing intensive therapy for 5, 6, 7 years, it's not going to be intense anymore. It's not going to be as beneficial. And so we really want to look at how can we make sure we're putting them in the best location for them.
And the center's really great because there are peers there. So you can work on those social skills.
Right,
We
for
have
sure.
a
That's what I was
room
going to say.
that looks like a classroom.
Yep.
More like a preschool, kindergarten classroom, but we can work on some of those group learning skills. So that piece is really great. And if a parent works, we're working parents.
Yep.
We get it. I couldn't be at home all day with my kids. So there's that ability. But in-home is really great too, because sometimes there are kids that you see, they go to school and they do great, and then they come home and they fall apart because they spent their whole day holding it together. So how can we help those home environment pieces? Because all kids are very different with their parents versus other people in the community versus in-home. So how can we work on that? And then parents get to be there. They get to see what's going on. They get to learn. They can observe and get more of that hands-on experience than the center. So they're both great. They just offer two different skill sets.
Yeah, it sounds like with the center, you're able to offer more services to more people
Yeah.
now than just the in-home stuff.
Well, and the in-home, like Paige was saying, you have to have a parent or an adult present for the entire time. We're not that adult present. We're just the therapist present.
Right.
And so that is really, really hard. The other benefit, though, of the in-home is there's a lot more community-based activities. So we have some clients that every day they go out, they're going to the zoo, they're going grocery shopping, they're going to different things that family does that now they're working on. Can we bring our child with us? How is this going to work? Can we work on that car riding? Are we working on that? All right, time to leave, time to go. All of those pieces
that transition period.
As parents, we take for granted. And these kids, that's a big deal. And so our therapists are able to go with and support that learning piece. And every program, regardless of in-home or center, we work to get 1 to 2 hours of family skills in. So we want that supervisor is going to meet with that parent and really help to teach those skills so that when we're not with that with that child, the parents know how to handle those situations.
Yeah. You mentioned ABA. Explain what that is.
I know we're so used to just ABA that we forget that not everybody knows what that is. It's applied behavior analysis.
Okay.
But basically what it is finding what motivates and then using that as a reinforcement. So it's not bribery. It's not a kid is laying on the floor having a behavior and we say, if you stop doing that, I'll give you a piece of candy. But finding what motivates them. And for some kids, it might be in the beginning a tablet. It might be getting away from a therapist. It might be food. And our goal then is to shape that. So now you have to do these 10 things before you get this. But I'm also, every time I give you the tablet, I'm going to be like, oh my God, you did so amazing. That was so great. And hopefully as you're pairing those reinforcements together, that excitement, that cheering, that social praise starts to become reinforcing too, so that we can fade out things they're earning, they can go longer, and that nice job, give me a high five, is reinforcing enough. Because in school, they're not going to get the tablet, they're not going to get candy all the time. But for some kids, my kids included, great, you had a really great week, you did well, you got all your homework done, you were a good listener, we totally can have a piece of candy, or we can have ice cream, or whatever it might be.
I was going to say, that brings up a really good point. I know for you, with your kids, it is. If you do great at your activities, you get to have some ice cream at the end of the day. And I think parents are always asking, well, when are you going to stop this reinforcement? As parents, we automatically are giving reinforcement. We just don't realize how we're doing it. And so it's finding what's effective for them versus what's effective for the next person. And that's a really big part of autism is there's no child with autism that is the same. And so it's the same with reinforcing any child. They might be motivated by ice cream. Some might be motivated by getting to go to a place.
That's same for adults too.
Yeah, exactly.
I definitely treat myself to ice cream. Right. And I've done a really good job. So. But even when you come to work, you get paid, right? If you weren't getting paid, how long would you actually keep going to work?
It's a bit different reward system for adults. But
It is, but it still exists out there. And so we use reinforcement all the time. And then you take those challenging behaviors, those less desired behaviors, and you figure out why they're happening, because there is some reinforcement at the end. For some kids, it might be, I throw a tantrum because I don't want to do what you told me to do. Well, if they get out of it, you're reinforcing that behavior. If they're having a behavior because you're on the phone and they want attention, and you hang up the phone and give them attention, you're reinforcing that behavior. So we want to cut off that reinforcement and teach them that reinforcement comes from those desired behaviors. I mean, it's really what we do all day long with everybody we engage with. It's just much more structured when you put it into this intensive program.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about that, thinking about as parents, as therapists, we ideally look at the challenges and end up giving attention for those automatically, and we have to stop and think, oh my goodness, this is something that we expect them to do, but they did it really well. You need to reward them for those opportunities too. And as parents, I think we step back and are like, well, that's their job. They should have done the dishwasher instead of been like, oh my gosh, you just unloaded the dishwasher. Like, thanks for doing that without me asking. And so we put a big focus on, like you were talking about, the positive behaviors, because we want to see more of those. The really good things we want to increase by giving that reinforcement. So that's a lot of what ABA is really all about.
Okay, interesting. You mentioned therapists in the field, therapists in the center. Are those separate people? Do you have people who just go to in-home and just stay in the center?
Yeah. The field has been a challenge. They're the same therapists. They have the same skill sets. It's just whether or not we can get staff that are willing to drive, staff that are wanting to go to different locations throughout their day. It is a lot easier to find staff that want to just be in one spot.
Especially Minnesota winters.
In Minnesota, the worst.
The exact same thing, right? Especially this winter. We have the fourth snowiest winter so far.
Yeah. I mean, we've had to close our center 6 times this year, just this year, and we opened November 28th. So it is a lot easier to find staff there. We have one staff that's doing part center, part in-home, and we're hoping to kind of increase what that looks like, because it is it's a challenge. It's a big challenge to keep those staff in the field, but we don't ever want to lose that part of our program, because it's such a benefit. And so that's kind of been on me, trying to find those people and really reaching out to all areas of, does anybody have any resources that I can utilize? But they're all ultimately the same therapist, and so we teach them all the same things.
Okay. So you guys hiring now, or always kind of looking for people?
Always. We have tons of kids on the wait list, and we tell all the families who get on our wait list, like, get on every wait list you can, because the sooner you can get in, even if you want a specific company, you can get services somewhere else and then switch when the time comes, but get in, because you don't want to lose that crucial time. And we can only grow with the staff that we have. We're never going to bring kids in if we don't have qualified staff. So we're always going to be hiring, because there are always going to be kids in need. I would love to say that there wouldn't be. That'd be amazing. But as of now, that need's there.
Yeah, one of the things we did when we opened our center is we started with a small number of kids. And so we're only bringing 1 to 2 kids in each month. With the staff that we're bringing in. So we're being really careful about that piece, because we don't want to have too many too fast and it just be pure chaos.
Interesting. So signs and symptoms of autism, diagnosis, all that stuff. What's that process like? What can parents look out for? What should they, ask their doctors about?
Yeah. The biggest piece is language delay is a piece, but you can have a language delay that's not on the spectrum.
Sure.
But go to your doctor regardless and ask, like, hey, I'm noticing this delay in language. Eye contact, socialization, how they're interacting. How are they interacting with toys? Are they kind of off by themselves? Do they struggle to engage with other peers? Is their toy play extremely limited? Repetitive behaviors are normal when we're young because we learn through our senses, right? Yep. So putting things in your mouth when you're young, it's how you explore the world, sure. right? It's normal. If we're not seeing it fade, it might be an oral piece, it might be OT might be a good thing, it could be just a repetitive behavior they have. Kids get really excited when they're young, they might jump up and down and flap their hands, and it's normal, but typically that starts to fade as kids get older if you're not seeing it fading. And if you're seeing that a kid is having a lot of challenging behaviors because they're struggling and you can't figure out why and they can't communicate why, that's also a piece to look for. But the biggest pieces of autism is that communication and that, I should call it social communication, sure. and those restrictive and repetitive behaviors. So those challenging behaviors and those repetitive behaviors that impede their learning. But here's the thing, if you have even the slightest bit of concern, talk to your pediatrician. Sure. If they're in school, talk to the school. Getting a diagnosis will never, ever, ever change who your child is, right? They're always going to be that same kid, but it can give them the strategies to be more successful. And that is so important. And you know what? Worst case scenario is you say, oh my gosh, I think my child might be on the spectrum. You get assessed and they say your child is. Okay, then you can get services and you get the needs, they get all their needs met, and doing it at a younger age when your brain is still developing.
Get those a lot sooner than waiting.
Yeah, it's so important versus waiting till middle school and they can't figure out how to navigate those horrible social environments in middle school and they crash and burn. And that is not going to be beneficial. And you know what? Maybe you go to the doctor and they're like, hey, it's just a language delay. Or, hey, your child has a sensory processing disorder. Go to OT. But don't hesitate to seek out that diagnosis, that help that it might be. It's the same piece of, I know we've talked a lot about this too, that IEP piece in school. It's like, well, if I give them an IEP and they get pulled out, well, then they get the needs met that
sure.
in their way, their learning environment, and then they can be successful and hopefully fade out that IEP and not need those supports. Same general idea with getting ABA therapy, and that autism diagnosis doesn't change who your child is. It just helps you learn how they learn, and they learn how to navigate the social world that might be difficult for them.
Yeah. Is there a certain age you start kind of looking for signs and symptoms, or is it just kind of like just knowing your child and when to bring them in?
You can diagnose at a pretty young age. Around 18 months, you can get that diagnosis. Okay. For some kids, you can really start to see those symptoms at a young age. They are crying when you pick them up and hold them when they're a baby. They don't want to be touched. They don't want that social interaction. They don't look at you. They're not tracking. So when you take a baby and you move a toy and they can see it, they're like, ooh, what is this thing that you're moving in front of me? If they're like, I could care less about those things. Once again, that 18 months, 2 years, you're not seeing language. There could be other things that cause these things, but those are pieces to look for. But some of the kids who might not be as affected by the autism diagnosis as other kids, you might not see it till later. You might not see it till they get to school. And you're like, wait, they are not engaging with other kids. They are off on their own, and they're quiet, and they stay calm in school, so they're not a problem child in school, but they aren't developing those social relationships that you would expect to see at that age. Because kindergarten, I know nowadays you have to learn to read and write, and it's so much more intense when I was a kid than when I was in kindergarten. But still, in kindergarten, really it's about social interaction. It's about learning how to play with people and engage with them. So if you're noticing a delay there, that's a big piece too. Yeah.
The other piece we've heard is the kids that do have those skills, and then they start to lose them. Yeah. And so that's a piece that parents have brought up. They were talking, they were coming to me for things, and then they just stopped. And that is also kind of that warning sign
Sure.
that, okay, something's not right. We've heard it from many families.
So many families.
But some families are like, right away, I knew right away. And then some are like, oh, this is changing as they get
Especially
older.
if you have like siblings who are older.
Yeah.
Right? It's just not the same. And you probably know those sooner.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lot harder when it's a first-time parent because they're like, wait, I didn't know I had nothing to
Yeah.
compare it to.
Right.
But if you have concerns, if the school has concerns, if your pediatrician has concerns, don't ignore them. A diagnosis does not change your child.
Sure.
Your child is still the amazing child they are.
So once a child is diagnosed, the family reaches out to you guys.
Mm-hmm.
What's the process from there to getting them into?
Yeah, so we have an
system.
intake process. So on our website, right on that first page is a big green intake application button. And we always recommend families go to that. As soon as we get that completed intake packet, their child gets put on our wait list. So like even yesterday, I had a phone call. Somebody, they don't have the diagnosis yet, but they're looking to get it. What should we do? And I recommended, hey, get your diagnosis. Here's a couple locations you can get that. But in the meantime, get that intake application everywhere. And we just heard this week, a lot of places are like a year to a year and a half out for intake. We're around that 6 month range right now before we can bring a child in. And it might even be longer, 6 to 8 months. Depending on the location, but get that in. Get your child on every wait list. Like Paige said, we recommend as many places as you can get because those lists are so long. And if by chance they're able to get you in, great. But like the lady that called yesterday, I recommended get that intake in. If you are done with your assessment and they're like, no, it is a sensory processing and you don't need our services, great, we'll take you off. But if you do, you're already on that
So
list.
it's best just get in the list.
Yes.
Initially,
Yes.
get in the line.
Yep. So once we get
go
that
from there.
intake, then Paige calls and kind of gives them a better idea of where they're at on the intake list. Once we're ready to bring them in, we start with that initial assessment. So they're meeting with a licensed professional like Paige. The parents are kind of talking about what their family goals are, what their needs are, what the struggles that they're seeing. Our supervisors and the program managers are meeting with the client and doing those initial assessments. So really getting to understand through our assessments where they're needing supports. But then we utilize a lot of that outside piece too. We want the school information. We love speech, OT, anything that they're getting outside of their home. We want to know because we want to collaborate.
Yep.
We want to make sure that we're working as a team, not as we're this person and they're that person and everybody's doing stuff different because that's not going to help anyone.
Yeah, it seems like it'd work better if it was just seamless between each other.
Totally. And so that's a really big part of that intake process. I would say from meeting with the family for intake to actually getting services, it's 1 to 2 months because we have to write those treatment plans. We have to get it approved through the state. There's a whole bunch of just logistics that fall into place.
Yep.
So we try to move things as fast as we can, but sometimes it takes a little bit longer.
Okay. Once somebody's in, they're on the wait list, now they're an actual client, how do they pay for it?
Yeah.
That's a great question. So the majority of our clients have medical assistance through disability or TEFRA.
Okay.
So some of them
Is
qualify.
that a state program or what
Yeah,
is it? Okay.
so that's through the state. So it's funded by the state. For some clients, they might have a commercial insurance plan as well, like Health Partners, Blue Cross Blue Shield, whatever it might be. But they also have medical assistance. We are in network with some commercial plans, but I always recommend medical assistance for a couple reasons. First off, just because you have a commercial plan doesn't mean they cover ABA services. Some insurance plans, they're like, 6 months of therapy should be enough, and then you're done. It would be great if that was the case. It's not always the case. So there's that piece. And then medical assistance provides so many additional resources. So as a parent, you might not be able to work, or you might have to be home more and helping more with daily living tasks that you wouldn't normally have to do. So you can self-pay yourself as a PCA through grants and waivers if you're on medical assistance. Maybe pay for someone else to come in and help. A PCA is a personal care assistant or personal care attendant. And someone else to come in and help with those skills, because maybe you've worked a long day and the last thing you want to do is have to spend 45 minutes trying to get a child into a bath, or maybe 45 minutes getting them out of the bath, depending on the situation. So having someone to help with those pieces. It also covers sensory equipment. If your child's in diapers past, I think it's like the age of 5 or something, those are covered by the state.
Okay.
If there are feeding difficulties because of it, there's money that can help cover different feeding things. It covers adaptive sports, adaptive swimming, horseback riding. So many additional pieces. So the resources are endless. Plus, it helps provide support to your child even when they are done with services with us. It is something that you can continue on and continue to get those benefits. So it's huge. And I'm not a full expert on all the pieces of what it covers, but it helps with those. So if medical assistance is paying for what we're doing, it's also going through your insurance as well. So it's covering that deductible piece. So even though there's a parental fee, sometimes it's worth it just because it takes care of that deductible and out-of-pocket max, which can be really nice.
Yeah, one of the biggest benefits I've seen families get is that the safety stuff. So you don't think about it. We don't think about being terrified of our child running outside in the middle of the night, or not having a fenced-in background or a backyard, like things like that. Having cameras around, so if you're trying to cook dinner and your child's playing in a room next to you and you can't actually see them, having those cameras to be able to make sure they're safe. All of these things that they have no control over. And so that's another huge piece to that getting medical assistance and just having those resources. And then you also have a social worker paired with that. And so they can help get you set up and get you kind of navigating how many things you can get and how to get those things.
Seems like so many stuff. Like how would someone start? So
and that's something we really push to be a part of too. Because as a parent, you just are like, this is my life. I just expect to not know how to do these things. And we have to remind them, like, this is added stuff that you're doing as a parent because you have a child with special needs and you have just learned to adapt to it because that's your life. And we want to make sure that they're getting all of the needs that they need met.
I remember a family that I worked with a very long time ago once said she remembered she was pregnant, and you read all those books on like how to parent and what to expect when you're expecting and all that stuff. She's like, and then you're told you have a child with autism, and they say throw out everything you learned. And she's like, so you throw out these books, and you get all these new books, and then you have to relearn it, and then they're supposed to adapt to the real world, and then you have to take all that and relearn now how to get them out there in the real world. And she's like, it's so overwhelming. Don't do it alone. Don't do it alone. Take advantage of the resources out there, because you don't have to do it alone. It takes a village. It takes a community. Use it.
Absolutely.
Crazy. Any other fun facts about Minnesota behavioral specialists that we should know, that we don't know, haven't covered yet?
Not that I can think of. I'm not going to lie, we love what we do. We're extremely passionate about it.
Seems like it.
If anyone's listening that wants to get into this field, it's so rewarding. It's so fun. And you don't know how great it can be until you get into it. Or if you're looking for resources, call. I have tons of families that I talk to for like an hour. They don't want services with us. They just have no idea what to do. And they just need someone to direct them. Call this person. Here's a good resource for this. We're always here to answer any questions, and there are a lot of other providers out there who are the same as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we didn't really talk about within the staffing realm is what you need to qualify to be a staff. And so, first of all, you have to love and want to be around children and love that aspect. You just need a high school degree to do it. However, we're looking for those people that are, within a psychology program, that have experience being in this field, working with children with special needs, maybe as a PCA, maybe as a nanny where you were in charge of a child with special needs. Those are the types of people we're always kind of reaching out for, whether they're in a bachelor's or a master's program. I always bring Paige's story up because you were in your master's program when you started this. She started ABA, and it took her 3 months before she was like, I get it. This makes sense. It wasn't a click overnight, but then after those 3 months, she was like, nah, never leaving, And so it's giving it a little bit of time, feeling, understanding if this really is what you want, or if this is just too overwhelming. Because initially it is really overwhelming. You're learning so many things, but once you kind of get in it, you're kind of locked in. So
I assume there's not a lot of college seniors listening to this podcast, but parents, yes.
Yeah.
So if they have kids who are interested in this career, can they contact you and kind of ask questions and stuff?
100%.
I know it's always nice to have a good resource, like when you're trying to plan out your future.
Right. Right. So. And I am actually just now starting to, I think I have 4 college graduates that are getting their bachelor's in psychology that I have interviews with over this next 2 weeks. And so it is that time of year. May is graduation, and they're all like, okay, now what do I do? And that's actually when we love to get students in because they're in that state of like, what is my next step? Do I want to stay in this field? What do I want to do within this field? And there's not a lot of ABA education in those courses. They're like, I had a class. And so we just like to get them in to experience that to help them kind of navigate where they're going to go down the road.
Cool.
So absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's it, guys. Thank you for letting me come and ask some questions and learn about your business. Wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you.